Welcome to ETHDam, to ETHDam, to ETHDam, to ETHDam, to ETHDam.
We have a panel about the funding side of, I would say, crypto, as it says here. And so I'm just going to go ahead and introduce Constanza. So please give it a round of applause for the moderator.
Hi, thank you. Is it working? Yeah, OK. Hi, thank you so much. So for the panel on public goods, we are going to have Vivian from PhD. So applause, please. Nico Gallardo, coming here. Julian Ma, that is welcome. And Shuki Gorilla. So round of applause here. So thank you so much. Let's start. Do you want to start by introducing yourself first and what you do, so that then we can take it off?
Sure. Does that work? Yeah, I think so. Okay, so I'm Julian. I'm a researcher at the Ethereum Foundation, working on some topics like MEV that was discussed in the previous panel. And now I'm working on scaling, so scaling the L1 and scaling blobs for the L2s. I guess it's related to public goods because we're building public goods. And it's been very interesting to work in an atmosphere where like, new people come in, you build everything in the open, and you can see your results, I guess, in the open.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Cheeky Gorilla. You can call me Cheeky. I'm a core contributor to Protocol Guild. We're focused on rebalancing incentives for working on Ethereum's core protocol to make sure that Ethereum can onboard and retain its talented core protocol developers to keep on shipping the upgrades they've been shipping. In my spare time, I'm an absolute privacy freak, so happy to nerd out with anyone about that.
Hey everyone, I'm Nico Gallardo from Octant. Well, what we're doing at Octant is basically been funding public goods, well, digital public goods for 2 years. And now we're shifting focus towards helping other ecosystems fund themselves as well, while at the same time finding Ethereum alignment and funding Ethereum as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vivian Plasencia, and I'm a software engineer in the Privacy and Scaling Explorations team at the Ethereum Foundation. And we also build public goods. So, yeah, it's related to this panel.
So thank you so much. I guess the first question to start and set the tone, the first question I have is, what is a public good? What's the definition of public good that you would like to have? Like Vitalik pointed out, it's not clear what it is public good in crypto. Is a project with a token but without a business model a public good? Or only like projects that don't have a token? So, and what about an open source project that has a defined business model? So what is public good and what is not public good? I guess I'm going to ask this question to all of you so that we can get the different definitions.
I'll kick things off, sure. I think if you ask Ethereum what is a public good, they will tell you everything is a public good, which basically means that nothing is a public good anymore, which is a shame. That's not technically correct. There are a wide variety of definitions for what a public good is. I, unfortunately, in the pressure of the moment, cannot remember a single one. But nevertheless, something that is providing benefits to people all over the world at scale in a way that's not monetizing those users, right? And I think there are a variety of public goods funding programs in Ethereum, which is truly an incredible thing and is truly one of the reasons why it's so fun to be in the Ethereum ecosystem. But you can see that all of those different funding programs kind of target different types of projects that they think are public goods. And so there really is a disconnect between what is it actually that we're trying to fund. And again, I don't think that's necessarily a terrible thing, because trying to trying to build funding for worthwhile projects is always worthwhile. However, I do think we can sidestep a lot of the complexity that we have with trying to figure out what are public goods by just reframing it around maybe dependency funding. Because at the end of the day, what we really want to do is provide funding for projects that we depend on. And those are much, much easier to identify. Those are much easier to quantify, like what is the impact that they're having? What is the scale of the dependency? And basically make sure that we pass funding along to those accordingly.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So my view on what's a public good is starting with the economic definition of public goods are non-excludable and non-rivalrous goods. So the non-excludable part means that you can't randomly pick people that can't use these goods. Any permissionless system is that by definition, basically. Non-rivalrous means that if I use it, it doesn't degrade someone else's user experience. This, I think, is a more interesting one in crypto, because if you use, for example, Ethereum, you're using some block space that someone else can't use at that point. So in that sense, Ethereum, the blockchain itself, isn't necessarily a public good, but a common good, as in it's non-excludable, but it's still rivalrous. But that maybe that doesn't really cover the message, because, for example, then Ethereum client code is a public good, because like, anyone can review the code, anyone can run the code, and it doesn't degrade someone else's user experience. So I think it's very, very nuanced what you actually call the public good, and it's important to have a discussion about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think public goods are these projects that benefits everyone and everyone can use. And it can have a business model or not, but I have seen it mainly in projects that don't have a business model. So, but it's mainly projects that benefits everyone and everyone can use. And in the Ethereum ecosystem that are also decentralized and that have the values of the ecosystem.
Thank you. Nico?
Yeah, well, I think we see already like how wide the variety of definitions of public goods are. And I'd like to focus a little bit on the kind of like digital public goods and like what we call public goods in the Ethereum space. And I think I've seen a shift in the definition of from public goods to network goods or even Ethereum goods, you know, that relate more specifically to Ethereum. Because what's good for, let's say, Ethereum maybe doesn't necessarily mean that is good for Solana, let's say. And does that exclude it from being a public good? Well, I would argue not really, as long as it's like open source and available for anyone. I think the open source part is like really key here, because if anyone can just fork the code and reuse it in different places, then as a digital public good, I think that's like maybe like the most important part of it.
Thank you. So, yes, go.
There was a part of your question that we haven't touched on that I wanted to touch on, was basically a hill that I will die on about if you are a so-called public goods project, are you allowed to have a token? And perhaps more importantly, are you allowed to raise VC funding? And I think this is a really, really interesting question. There is no right or wrong answer, but I will give you my perspective of this. And my perspective of this is predicated on my vision for Optimism's retroactive public goods funding program. How many people here are familiar with Optimism RPGF? Okay, a good amount of hands. Basically, Optimism is a layer 2, and they are dedicating a portion of the transaction fees generated on that layer 2 towards funding public goods. And the way that this works is they have these so-called badge holders who are basically trying to figure out, okay, in the last couple quarters, what are the projects that basically created the most good or that had the highest impact for the Optimism or Ethereum ecosystem broadly, and basically channel those transaction fees, channel that funding towards those projects. And when this was initially conceived by, of course, Vitalik Buterin, when this idea of retroactive funding, there was this notion that basically, if something like Optimism can achieve sufficient scale, right, so they have enough transaction fees so that projects can truly depend on this funding over the long term, then you might see this beautiful situation where you can have public goods projects who are valued based on the amount of RPGF, the amount of retro funding that they are going to receive on a quarterly basis from this program. And that would kickstart this flywheel effect where you can basically have VCs who are looking to invest into projects based on how much good they can create. And that's mind-blowing, that idea. We are still very far from that being a reality, but like the potential is there. But of course, for that potential to actually become a reality, two things are required. Number one, these projects, they need to be able to have tokens or do ICOs, because otherwise what are they going to give to VCs? And number two, obviously, they need to be able to accept VC funding. And I mean, in some ways, you can think of VC funding as like a bank loan that needs to be repaid anyways. And so from my perspective, yes, public goods projects, they can absolutely have a token. They can absolutely raise VC funding. But of course, you have to have a token that's used in the right way, and you have to have VCs that won't corrupt the project. So, you know, nothing's black and white. You have to consider the ramifications of what you're doing. But generally speaking, I do not think that those two things should exclude a project from being considered a public goods project.
Interesting, thank you. So we have 1 yes for public goods can have a token. So now at this point, I want to know the other opinions. Can public goods have a token? And what's the role of VC in public goods?
So I'd say for me, it's about the outcome, basically. So do you actually produce a public good? And whether you have VC funding is about the process. I mean, there could be a million reasons why a VC would want to fund something that's a public good that they don't directly get some benefit from. And you can see this happening a lot. For example, Paradigm builds like a lot of tooling, and it makes a lot of sense for them to build this tooling, right? I mean, that's how their portfolio companies, they can create other products, they can onboard more developers that work either in Paradigm or for their portfolio companies. But like the specific tooling that they make is essentially a public good. So that reason why a VC funds something, I think, is not so important. How a public good funds itself beforehand is also not like the defining characteristic of whether something is a public good. It's just like the outcome is the thing that matters, and the process is malleable at some point, I guess.
So is that a yes?
It's yes.
Yeah. Yes, okay.
Yeah, I would also agree with that. I think Ethereum is maybe like the prime example of like a public good that has a token, it has raised money from investors, that is making like a lot of impact. I think a lot of people confuse the word public goods with non-profit, which is, you know, causing a lot of confusion all around. But I don't think it's necessarily the case. Like, you can be a public good and offer a lot of the value to people, while at the same time having a revenue model that makes it sustainable. In fact, I think a lot of public goods would benefit from thinking a little bit outside of the, okay, what I can provide for free, what can I offer with extra value to make myself sustainable. So, yeah.
That's interesting. So you're even taking it one step further and say, yes, it can have a token. Yes, it can be a business. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think yes, because if they find a way to fund themselves, I think that's better, as long as it's still public, everyone can use it. And I think yes, because if they find a way to fund themselves, I think it's fine too. Yeah, both.
So if I may, so what you just both said about like they should find like revenue models, like in principle, I agree. Like if you're starting a business, you should be able to make sure that you can, you know, pay to put food on the table and support yourself and your family. That's absolutely rational. It is also a tough nut for the ecosystem to crack. Like, we have not cracked public goods funding yet. There are many different projects that are trying to crack it, like Octant, Lotto PGF, Protocol Guild. We have Paddle Battle, Gitcoin, Optimism. Like, everyone's trying their own unique flavor, and yet still, despite all those initiatives, projects would still be very rational to not depend on that and try to find their own revenue sources. And I am hopeful that one day that won't be the case anymore. Very ambitious plan, but you know, I think we've seen that the Ethereum ecosystem is dedicated to solving this problem, because what we really want is for these talented entrepreneurs to truly dedicate themselves to just providing the most good in the world, as opposed to figuring out how to monetize. But again, this is the wide-eyed Ethereum purist view, I suppose.
Thank you. Continuing on this line, if we look at the non-digital definition of public goods, then it is everything that we might need from defense to transport. So what's the relationship between public goods and the funding models? What are the best models, the best projects working on capital formation, capital allocation for public goods, and how can we create self-sustaining public goods?
Yeah, I'm going to be a little bit shilly here, but this is actually what we're trying to achieve at Octant. Indeed, what you mentioned is exactly right, like how can we marry capital formation with capital allocation. And I think, especially in the public goods funding space, this is what we've been kind of like falling behind a little bit, because I mean, we have found a lot of really cool capital allocation mechanisms, like you know, quadratic funding, conviction voting, auctions, lotteries, like a bunch of different stuff. But we haven't really kind of discovered that much the capital formation side of things. And I think it's been always in front of our eyes, at least that's what we believe at Octant. To give you a bit of context, at Octant we use staking rewards to fund public goods, and what we want to do now is like create a protocol to to generate yield through DeFi strategies or staking, and use that yield to fund ecosystems and Ethereum. So I think that's like a very kind of Web3 native way of funding public goods, even without risking your own treasury. But in general, I'm really looking forward to other types of kind of capital formation, like revenue generation for these public goods can be quite interesting if we find a way, and some other dynamics like the ones I mentioned, like auctions or lotteries that we were experimenting before.
Thank you. Following on those lines, we have a very interesting question. Can we really map all our public goods dependencies, especially those that don't have adequate funding?
I mean, there are people who are trying, right? Deep Funding proposes to do this. Basically, take the network of all the GitHub repos that people are using in the ecosystem, and then leverage some experts who provide a snapshot view of the impact that those repos are having, broadly speaking, on the ecosystem, and then leveraging AI, because why not, to basically model out kind of an aggregate view of all the experts to make sure that all the repos that have been identified can achieve funding proportional to their impact. That is a super ambitious goal. Like Deep Funding themselves, as far as I'm aware, they have not done a pilot yet. As far as I'm aware, there's only one project that has done a pilot with AI allocation for this kind of thing, and their conclusion was we are no longer going to use AIs for allocating funds. But that's not to say that like this is not a worthwhile experiment. It absolutely is. All projects who are trying to solve this problem are worthwhile experiments, as long as we're all innovating and not just copy-pasting from each other, which is the case currently. So yes, if we can map out like a dependency graph, that would be fantastic. Protocol Guild doesn't do that because not all public goods, not all dependencies have a GitHub repo, for example. Like think about Ethereum research. This is a foundational public good, obviously, and is what pushes the clients, the Geth, Aragon, Teku, etc., to implement these upgrades into Ethereum. But those are harder to quantify in like a dependency graph, unless you're somehow, I guess, crawling the entire web, including ETH research and whatever else. So it is a huge task. There is no clear way to do that correctly right now, but I applaud the people who are trying to do that, and rest assured, if they find success with that, then that will benefit the entire ecosystem, because it'll be another unlock for us to know that this is potentially the right path to go down or not, but we'll see.
Thank you. Now, going from the broader public goods to the reason why we're here, privacy. What are some examples of public goods to advance privacy? And what does this mean in the context of today, in the context of the surveillance, for example?
Yeah, so there are some protocols that want to advance the privacy in the ecosystem. Some examples are, a lot of these protocols are part of privacy and scaling explorations team, and I can mention some, like Semaphore. It was used at DEF CON last year, and is a zero knowledge protocol for anonymous membership proof. And it's also used in the World project, and Paywise also is using this project for voting. And another project, I would say Macy, which is for private voting, and also CKKit, which is a project with libraries, algorithms for privacy-preserving applications and protocols. And yeah, there are a few, so just to mention this, but there are some projects being used in real life that want to advance the privacy-preserving ecosystem.
I'd say more generally, zero-knowledge proofs are a great example. Right? Ethereum has pushed zero-knowledge proofs libraries and implementations quite far, and a lot of these are very open source. And apart from just the code, there's of course a lot of academic research in this, which is open source and I guess a public good. So I think that's a really good example of a privacy-focused public good.
Thank you. I think that Nico wants to answer, no?
No, I was gonna ask Chiki actually, because as a privacy freak, like I'm sure he has something to say.
Yeah, you did not clarify crypto, unless I didn't understand. I will shill probably my favorite privacy project, Graphene OS. If you have not heard about it, it is basically a way to reclaim privacy on your phone in the most user-friendly way possible. For anyone who has tried to go down the privacy path, you will find out very quickly it is fucking inconvenient, right? Like the amount of times you have to inconvenience yourself for privacy is mental. It's why most people don't bother with it. Graphene OS makes it easy, especially if you are already an Android user. So basically, Graphene OS takes Android and scoops out all of the Google in it and makes that portion of the phone opt-in. So basically, you can have a vanilla Android experience that very much looks and feels like what you would have with the Google experience, but completely free from any surveillance and tracking from Google. And that's a phenomenal thing. That does mean that there are some compromises. By taking out Google, it means like no Gmail, no Maps, and some people, they live by those things. But what's amazing about Graphene OS, or another thing that's amazing about it, is that you can basically opt in to reintroducing those services, those features, back into the operating system, but in a sandboxed way. So if you still want to use Google Maps, you can. You can kind of enable it. But you're enabling it, again, in a sandbox way, which means that the amount of data that Google can collect from your usage of that is extremely limited compared to what they were ordinarily able to collect on a normal Google Android phone. So honestly, if you are at all curious about privacy, if you are curious in safeguarding your security and you are an Android user, your switching cost to move to Graphene OS is very, very small. If you want to know more about that, come talk to me afterwards. I can show you on my phone what it looks like, but it looks exactly like Google Android, right? And the only complexity, or the only kind of hurdle, let's call it, is that it only works on Google Pixel phones. This is because Graphene OS is built by a small team, and they cannot optimize the operating system for all the phones on the planet. And ironically, as it turns out, the Google Pixel line of phones, they actually have the strongest security guarantees when it comes to the hardware inside the actual device. And so that's why you need to have a Pixel phone to use Graphene OS, but it should not stop you from trying Graphene OS. Thank you for letting me shill that.
Well, I know that I'm supposed to be taking the questions later, but this brings like a very good question we're receiving. You already answered, but should one public good project, not your own?
Can you repeat that?
You need to shield one public good project, but not your own, not the one you're working for.
Oh, so many. Where do we start? Protocol Guild. you know, Ethereum. I think people, a lot of DeFi protocols I would consider public goods as well. To mention a few, Aave, Morpho. I think, as I said, like anything that's open source, I'm really happy to push forward. If we're talking about public goods funding, I think Paddle Battle is doing some excellent experiments that I'm really looking forward to see. So yeah, could go on forever.
That's the key takeaway I didn't expect. Aave as a public good, so we can tweet it and let Stani know. Vivian, what's the public good project you want to share that is not PSC?
Yeah, so I think the libraries we use, let's say Ethers, libraries we use to create applications in the Web3 space, I think most of them, probably all of them, are public goods because they are open source, everyone can use them and contribute to them, and yeah, so these kind of things, libraries.
I want to shout out some of the OG public goods, like the NumPy libraries and some of the like very low-level libraries that everyone uses and no one thinks about. And there are people behind there maintaining it, and some people are kind of stuck in their maintainer role because they can't find who's going to do it after them. So yeah, shout out to them, I guess.
I would love to chat with you about it because at Octant we're trying to find out exactly those things. So let's chat.
Amazing. So one of the things is that it's not just about funding with money, but also with resources and people that can contribute. And one of the problems with building in public is that there is a constant influx of newcomers that needs to be onboarded, and that takes time and takes resources. So how can you ensure high quality outputs given limited funding and limited time and so many new people coming and wanting to contribute?
Yeah, I think documentation is very important so that people can understand the project. And I will also say that mentorship is very important. It's true that it can be difficult because there are a lot of people and with different backgrounds, but mentorship is very important too. And the path to contribute, let's say contributing guidelines so that people can know how to do it, how they can contribute, and maybe also have a governance or a way to filter high-quality contributions. That can help too, so that you know which people will contribute more on specific sites. But yeah, that's very difficult. And in this case, I think that documentation, mentorship, and a path to contribute are the three main things.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I can add on to that, so, I'd like to compare public goods funding to some extent to like the housing crisis that we have in Amsterdam today. You can't just solve it by giving more money to the people that need a house. You need to actually build the houses, right? And in public goods funding, we have a similar sort of problem. We can't just give grants to people who do like one-off work to do short-term focused work. You need to actually create teams where people can thrive. And so like Vivian mentions the mentorship. And I think ProtoDeal is an interesting example of that because it's a more longer-term vision. So you know what you can expect for the coming time. And you know that if you onboard more people, they can also potentially be eligible for ProtoDeal. So that really allows you to like build more houses, but then get more people to work on open source stuff.
Thank you. And in the context of building the house, today with a very fragmented regulatory landscape, in the context of building permissionless applications or permissionless public goods, what is the role and the risk for public goods? Like writing open source, for example, apparently can land in jail. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but this might be related to what we were talking about earlier of like, you know, how to make it sustainable, you know, like if you're open sourcing, how much are you differentiating and how much, you know, like you can use the technology as a defensibility for against, let's say, other competitors. I'm personally a big proponent that if we open source everything, then like technology just advances faster because then, you know, there's more openness to collaboration, and then just like the teams that actually shine more are the ones that are like moving the technology forward faster. So yeah, not sure if that answered your question, but I think it might go in that direction of defensibility.
Yeah. Any other answer?
I mean, trying to follow the regulations that may or may not exist, like they're always changing. So I think it's really difficult to give advice to public goods projects on like how to build in a compliant way, because at the same time, a lot of what us in the Ethereum land are trying to do is build like a better version of what we have today, even if some people today may consider that what we're trying to build not super compliant, right? Because we're, for example, leaning too much into privacy. So I have no wise suggestions on what to do there. I guess the most important thing that you can do is just for yourself, be comfortable with the risk that you're taking, and please acknowledge the fact that you are taking a risk, whether you're a public goods project or not, working in crypto today, unfortunately, in some places more than others. And so just be mindful of that, and don't do anything that you would ultimately regret.
Do you think that the role of public goods will change in the context of network states, or do you think it will stay the same? Like building for the society you want, that's something we should do. So advancing privacy and advancing public goods. Is that going to change in the future?
Ethereum's going to change the world.
Yeah.
Yes. So yes.
Yeah. Okay. Another question I have is that, especially in the debate, there has been a resurgence on whether public goods can be defined as crypto-communism. So how do you respond to that framing? Is that flawed? Is that unhelpful? Is that something that we need? Or is just...
I think we're a little bit stuck in like old political definitions of things. I think we should move a little bit forward and start defining our own things and like what they mean, and not trying to derive things from the past. I think, I don't know, like what I personally dislike the most about communism is that it's enforced, right? Like it's very top down, and I think in crypto, like by nature, we're doing pretty much the opposite. So it's a little bit hard for me to relate it, although I understand that some people might see it as, okay, like if you're doing something for a commune, like a group of people, then that's communism. I think it's like extremely reductionistic and like, again, like being too much stuck in the past. I like to think, like maybe the opposite, like capitalism and like liberalism has a lot more of an abundant mindset, and like if we can afford like having public goods and like open sourcing everything and advancing technology faster that way, then I believe that's like very far from like what communism would be.
Thank you. Chiki, do you have anything to add? I think you do.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think it's better not to talk anything, and it's because ideology usually divides people, and I think it's better to focus on just the outcome and the results. So if it's for everyone and it's good for everyone and everyone can use it, I think it's better to focus on that part and not ideology or tax something. I think it's for everyone, so just focus on that. That will unite more people than if we tag this to an ideology or to politics.
Very well said. Yeah, Ethereum is about collective empowerment. And so not to, like, maybe I'm putting my foot in my mouth, but like Ethereum is for communists as much as it is for capitalists, right? And this, is Amin here? No. This debate has been, some people have made a joke of it, some people have taken it very seriously. It's gotten a little bit emotional. I don't think it's necessarily productive to wade into that argument. Again, I think there's space for all mindsets in Ethereum. That's the whole point of credible neutrality. I will say that Protocol Guild, as a funding mechanism, has been accused of being communist repeatedly, not just by Amin. In fact, the Optimism crew I think they accused us of being that like within 3 months of launching Protocol Guild. And the reason why is because we basically collect funding and then we distribute it to Ethereum's core devs, vested over 4 years based on how long you've been contributing, right? So our impact metric is time, right? Like it doesn't matter if you're like a shitty programmer or a great programmer. If you have kind of served the same amount of time, you will get the same amount of funding from Protocol Guild. And that kind of equality in distribution is what is the reason why people have called Protocol Guild communist. From our perspective, we did not set out to design something communist. We set out to design something that was simple, right? Like we did not want to have a lot of governance overhead with this mechanism because we are going around to all the projects in Ethereum's ecosystem and saying like, hey, could you please help to fund your dependencies, right? You have this dependency on Ethereum's core protocol. We would suggest you donate 1% of your token supply to vest over 4 years directly to Ethereum's core devs so they can keep on shipping the scaling upgrades that you need to succeed. And that's a lofty request. And the only way that we're going to convince the ecosystem to actually do that, and shout out to the projects that we have been able to convince to do that, Eigenlayer, Tycho, Puffer, EtherFi, and some others that I'm unfortunately missing. They are doing so because they trust the mechanism, and also because they trust the mechanism is simple enough so that it can't be distorted or corrupted. Now, all that being said, we are constantly trying to figure out what is the best way for us to make sure that Protocol Guild is truly serving Ethereum and the ecosystem. And so there are things that we can improve by, for example, trying to take into consideration other impact metrics to make sure that the people who are truly making a difference in Ethereum's core protocol are in some way recognized for that. But at the same time, Protocol Guild is not built for Ethereum's core dev superstars. It's built for the median core dev, because the reason why Protocol Guild exists is because the financial incentives associated with this work are far lower than elsewhere in the ecosystem. And so these core devs are constantly getting ludicrous job offers from other ecosystems or from other projects in Ethereum, and it's not financially rational for them to say no to those job offers. But it's not the superstars, the superstar core devs who leave us. It's the median core dev. And they have so much ingrained knowledge that losing one of them really hurts. There's not more than a couple hundred of these individuals. And so we are optimized for the median core dev. And to that extent, we are, like I said, constantly looking into how can we improve this mechanism, but we need to be as thoughtful as Ethereum's core protocol development is. We cannot introduce an attack vector. We cannot introduce something that goes against our own credible neutrality, because these are the people who are building the future of Ethereum, and that's a really important job.
Thank you. That was actually super interesting. I didn't know you were optimizing for the medium core dev. Which brings to another question. So this is how Protocol Guild is rationalizing and directing investment. What about Octant?
So in the past, we've been kind of like experimenting a bunch with how to fund public goods. We have like a very community-based approach. Like, our community of GLM token holders and lockers can decide where the funding of the staking rewards go to. And now after 2 years of experimenting, we've had a lot of lessons of how effective that is. You know, like, of course, there's always the problem of civil attacks and people trying to game the system. So with those learnings, we are trying to create this kind of protocol that allows other ecosystems to fund their own kind of network goods or whatever is their dependencies, whatever is beneficial for them, and allowing their own communities to decide for that. So kind of like distributing this kind of decision making towards to different communities and the communities that are relevant for themselves, while at the same time trying to find a layer of alignment between all these communities that fund like the Ethereum public goods. So it's yeah, it's still like very, well, I guess like opposite to Protocol Guild is a lot more like community driven in a way. And yeah, I would say we're yet to see how that next experiment plays out.
Thank you. Thank you. I thought you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to ask GK a question actually. So you say Protocol Guild has this like simple funding mechanism basically, and it's easier to I guess tell that to people and spread the message. Deep funding is the exact opposite, right? It's very complicated, and so do you see that even if deep funding is like a great success, would it be a lot harder to raise funds for that?
Deep funding is fundamentally trying to solve a different problem than Protocol Guild. Deep funding, don't want to speak for Vitalik, but obviously he's a huge proponent of deep funding. And deep funding appears to be his answer to the question, how can I donate like X amount of money into one smart contract to distribute funding in a way that's impact-based to the entire ecosystem? And like, damn, that's an ambitious thing to be able to do, right? Like it's not specialized, it's literally fund the entire ecosystem. And I applaud the pursuit of such things, right? Like there's definitely gonna be very useful data that comes out of that. Versus Protocol Guild, which is laser focused on fund the core devs who are building Ethereum, right? And so given that, we obviously approach the way that we treat our funding mechanisms completely different, right? Like it is easy to identify who these core devs are because there's relatively few of them, right? Whereas with deep funding, you need an AI to reason about it, right? And so it's too early to say like how will Protocol Guild pivot to like accommodate deep funding. We're waiting to see on results of the pilot, and the results of the pilot will either be like a "we told you so" moment, or it will be a egg on our face moment, and we have to rethink like how can we incorporate some of those learnings. And like either way, it's a good thing for Ethereum's ecosystem because we have like one more door open or one more door closed in terms of like what is the right next step.
Thank you. Looking at the questions we got, there is one that is very interesting. Should Ethereum only fund its own public goods, or should it fund public goods in the wider world? So that means both in the digital crypto space, but also, I guess, in the non-digital IRL space.
So do you mean should the Ethereum protocol or the Ethereum Foundation fund everything, or?
The question only says Ethereum, but I would say the Ethereum both.
Okay.
Let's see both, yeah.
So I think Ethereum protocol is interesting because Optimism is doing like somewhat like that, right? They take their transaction fees and they spend them on public goods. I believe they spent them mostly on public goods that are directly relevant to them. But yeah, maybe that's something that they consider. I think Ethereum has considered this, like spending our transaction fees on public goods, on funding either Ethereum public goods or others, and people have decided against. So I think that's not happening, at least for now. I think the Ethereum Foundation is funding like a variety of things, and Vivian's maybe better suited to talk about that. But you can think of like deep funding, for example, as not being directly relevant to Ethereum protocol, yet it's funded by the Ethereum Foundation. So I guess some of it is happening.
So what is the question, like to talk about?
Should Ethereum, both the Ethereum Foundation and the protocol, fund only its public goods, or also like the wider world public goods?
So if it should fund public goods in the ecosystem, or also, yeah, I think, for example, Semaphore, one of the projects I work on, it's not for Ethereum. It can be used on off-chain in a Web2 application. So it can be used not on Web3. So I think yes, yeah, and Semaphore is still a public good, and it's funded by the Ethereum Foundation, and there are a lot of others, because PSE is focused on advancing cryptography and privacy-preserving applications. So this can be for Web 2, for Web 3, for Ethereum, for other layers too. So yeah, it's mainly focused on cryptography and privacy. It doesn't matter if it's on Ethereum or others. It's for everyone, for all the layers and for the world.
Yeah, I personally think that Ethereum should, at least at this super early stage, I mean, it's been 10 years, but I feel still quite early, we should really focus on funding ourselves more, you know, like funding Ethereum and like growing Ethereum. Because, I mean, I think we all here agree that Ethereum is a force of good that is already making a lot of huge impact in the world. Like, I come from Bolivia, where now there's like a huge economic and banking crisis, and a lot of people are finding refuge in you know, in the Ethereum network, basically, like by transacting stable coins. So I think if we keep growing that, like reducing the costs and like trying to just make this system a lot bigger, even growing it, you know, I believe is an important part of how to make Ethereum succeed, and growing Ethereum as a public good should be considered as well. I think we still should focus on that before looking outside a little bit.
What's the deadline or like the milestone you would like to reach before going further?
That's a good question. I don't really have a straight answer. Like maybe my co-panelists here have some more ideas, but yeah, I would say once Ethereum like has reached like, I don't know, like a big percentage of the world is using Ethereum, then we can start thinking of like funding other things outside of it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think if you look at companies, whether they decide to pay out dividends or invest it in themselves, it's kind of a similar question, right? And I think you pay out dividends when you think that your internal investments aren't going to be that lucrative anymore. I think for Ethereum, currently the internal investments are huge. I mean, there's a lot of scaling room that we can do, and there's a lot of improvements that we can make. And so when those improvements have dried up, when the protocol is basically ossified, then we can think about like other stuff.
So from my perspective, if we're talking about the EF, they should keep on doing more or less what they're doing. But I'll take the opportunity to get on my soapbox. Like, why does Ethereum have all this focus on public goods funding? Well, because social norms don't exist around funding your dependency, at least not at the scale at which we need. And so, like, to answer the question, like, holistically, I don't care who you are, what you are. I don't care if it's like a crypto project or a non-crypto project. Fund your dependencies, right? If you're using open source software and they're not monetizing you and you're not paying them, consider paying them something. Yeah, buy them a coffee every month so that they can survive, right? If we can instill that mindset to a majority of people, then maybe Protocol Guild and Octant and Paddle Battle and whoever else wouldn't need to exist, right? It takes a village. And so to the extent that we can establish social norms around funding your dependency, that is a net positive for the world. That's really what we want. So when you're doing your donations, hopefully you are, don't think about if these are crypto projects or not. Just fund what matters to you, the stuff that you know that if it's gone tomorrow would hurt you, because these are projects that probably need your funding.
That's super interesting because, I mean, we grew up in the free internet. Free as in, we don't pay with our money, we pay with our data. So I go on Google and I don't pay to use Google. I go on Instagram and I don't pay like to use Instagram. Then I pay with my own data. But yeah, there is no immediate cost that I'm facing. It's all something that is in the back, so I don't think about it. So doing what you say requires a shift in the mindset, requires me knowing that if I use a software, then that software needs to be maintained. That software needs to pay its contributors. So I need to contribute. And if it's not with my data, then it is with my money. So how do we achieve this shift in mindset? That, by the way, is going to be so helpful to create a better privacy-preserving internet.
Can I get back on my soapbox?
Okay, sorry.
You can give
a
one-word answer to that question.
Yeah, the companies who are destroying our privacy are monopolies. Ethereum is enabling the destruction of monopolies. And so hopefully this is a way that we can bypass this issue that we have today.
Thank you.
Cool.